Okay, hello. So this is the short lecture for Chapter 7, which is the muscular system. Let me pull this up here and let's take a look at this. Um, as I had probably shared before, we are going to be looking at the muscular system from a very systemic level instead of looking at it from as individual muscles. And we'll talk about why. You have lots of muscles. You have hundreds and hundreds of muscles. You can see from these diagrams, these just highlight some of the main ones that you might be familiar with, like your biceps and your triceps. Let's see, your calf muscle, which is your gastrocnemius, your quadriceps, your gluteus maximus, your abs or rectus abdominis. So these are all different muscles. The thing you have to remember about muscles is muscles can only do one thing, which I think we've talked about before. They can only contract. They can only get shorter. That's all they can do. They can contract or relax. That's it. And so you have to have lots of muscles to be able to work to move in different directions. Like to move your arm or to contract your arm, you would contract your bicep. But to extend your arm, you would have to contract your tricep and pull it in the opposite direction. To lift your arm, you have to pull with your deltoid, and to move it down, you have to use your latissimus dorsi. So you have all these muscle pairs working together to produce the range of movement that you enjoy. For example, there's like 6 different muscles around each eyeball to pull it up and down, left and right, and side to side. So those 6 muscles are required for you to give just your eye its range of motion that it has. So that's why you have so many different ones. So whenever we talk about flexors and extensors, we're talking about those pairs of muscles that pull one way or the other to extend or bring back in a arm or a leg or something, right? So we are going to focus, we're not going to memorize all these different muscles or anything like that, but we do want to understand that they have to work in pairs because of how they operate. Some overall functions of muscles. Obviously, they produce movement, but they also help maintain posture and position. So as I watch you guys kind of fall asleep in class, you start getting the nods because you're not maintaining your posture anymore. You don't have you have voluntary control of your skeletal muscles. You get to decide when they move and how they are oriented. And when you fall asleep, you forget about doing that because you're trying to fall asleep. Your muscles support soft tissues, like you could say all your whole abdomen is, unlike your thoracic cavity, your abdomen is just a sheets of muscle that cover your whole abdominal cavity underneath your rib cage, and that supports all of those soft tissues. Muscles guard entrances and exits. They hold your mouth closed. They hold your end of your digestive system shut. Whenever you fall asleep, your mouth can like hang open, and then 8 spiders a year can crawl in there. That's totally fake, by the way. Don't ever believe that. It's false. But they don't want to be in your mouth. And so whenever you have your muscular system operating, it holds you closed. Okay, it guards your eyes with the muscles that control your eyes to be open or shut. Your mouth. When someone passes away, their muscles surrounding their rectum relax, and they might soil themselves, right? Because that muscular system is no longer able to function. One of the other main functions of your muscular system is to maintain body temperature. Movement of muscles generates heat, which anybody who's ever exerted themselves, they know this. You run around and then you get hot. That's good. Now, if you get too cold, then you will start involuntarily contracting muscle, which is called shivering, and then that will help warm you up. So if you get cold and start to like shiver and stuff like that, your muscles are just rapidly contracting and relaxing in order to generate some heat to help warm you up. So here you can see some muscle fibers right through here, and there are the nuclei in them. There's some connective tissue in between them, which we'll talk about here in just a moment. And you can see all these different long muscle fibers, which when we talk about muscle fibers, we're actually really saying muscle cell. A muscle cell is a long fiber, and it's not like a normal cell that you would normally see. They can be up to 12 inches long, or some of the long muscle fibers in like your quadriceps or your gluteus maximus or something, some on down on your leg. They can be really long, but that's so they can contract over a long distance. Now, to help deal with this, they are multinucleated. They are studded with nuclei all up and down, all the way up and down that muscle fiber. One other thing that you can see in this diagram is that these muscle fibers don't like exist on their own. They're bundled together with other muscle fibers, with connective tissue. This is the endomysium and epimysium. Basically, it's connective tissue holding together muscle fibers. Think of this like a cable. So you know, like on a steel cable, it's not just a solid piece of metal. It's multiple pieces of metal twisted together, or like a rope even. Well, it's the same here. Instead of just having one big thing that contracts, you've got lots and lots of small fibers, muscle cells, that are bound together by connective tissue, collagen, really super strong, and then that allows them to be held together and contract as a unit. Okay, and depending on how many of those muscle fibers you activate, some can start to constrict, or all of them can constrict if you're working as hard as possible, and so that controls how much contraction you get and how strong it is. So that's how they work. Now, this is gross, but it makes sense. If you've ever handled a piece of meat like a steak or a roast and you've looked at it, or even after you've cooked it, like roast, it like breaks apart in like these little like strands or bundles. Okay, those are the exact same bundles we're looking at here. When you cook it, that protein in the muscle fiber doesn't break down, but all of the connective tissue that holds it together does break down, like if you have a roast or something. And that's why it breaks into those individual little strands. So when you're eating like pulled pork, you're eating the muscle from that animal, and you're really just you've separated all those different little muscle tissue groups in there. You can see that on a steak when it's cut perpendicular to the grain of the muscle with the direction that the muscle fibers run. We usually cut our meat perpendicular to that to make it more tender and easier to chew up and everything. So you can actually see that texture of this on that raw cut of meat, which is really just muscle tissue. So when you eat chicken, like a chicken breast or whatever, it's just a big chunk of muscle tissue. Okay. So how do we actually control the muscle? Well, each muscle has a motor neuron, a neuron that connects to a muscle, hence the term motor, connected to it. To initiate that, it has to release a particular neurotransmitter, right, at this neuromuscular junction. So a neuron and a muscle are paired up. And you can see here, this is the neuromuscular junction. If you may have remember from earlier on, we talked about this synapse, which is the signaling end of a neuron that actually passes a signal on, right? So this is connected to, or not connected, it's adjacent to a muscle. And it has to release a particular neurotransmitter from the neuron to the muscle to tell it to contract. So if you're like, I want to move my finger, move, each time I send a neural signal to my finger, those muscles in my finger get stimulated by the neurotransmitter that gets released, and then those muscles contract. And whenever I want to quit moving my finger, I go ahead and I stop releasing the neurotransmitter, and I can go ahead and go the other way or relax or whatever. Okay, in this case, and this is something you will need to know, the particular neurotransmitter, right, neuron transmitter, it sends a signal that we want to talk about, is something called acetylcholine. This is a pretty important neurotransmitter in your body. Sometimes acetylcholine is just called ACH because who wants to write acetylcholine all the time, right? That triggers that contraction in a rather complex way by altering how permeable the cell membrane is, and it creates this flow of calcium and sodium ions, right? Ions are charged particles, so it's like Ca plus and Na plus ions that trigger an action potential, kind of like an electric charge type thing, but it's a we refer to it as an action potential. That explains some things. One, that explains why sometimes when things get shocked, they like jerk or move. It's because it influences this. The other thing is whenever you are low on electrolytes like sodium and calcium and potassium ions in your body, it can help cause cramps. So, you're working out, you've sweated a bunch, you've lost all this sodium and potassium and salts from your sweat, or you haven't eaten good or something, you start to get cramps. Everybody's like, go eat a banana and get some potassium, even though, by the way, potatoes are higher in potassium than bananas. So don't eat bananas, go get like some French fries or some mashed potatoes or something. Plus they taste better. Anyway, side note, if you replace those electrolytes, those ions, then you can then properly regulate your muscle contraction better. Okay, let's go back to acetylcholine and take a look at how this works. So here is your synapse. Here's your muscle tissue. A neurotransmitter like acetylcholine gets released from vesicles in this cell, right? Those little membrane-bound chambers that store stuff. And when you release those from the cell, those then bond to a receptor site. And they hook in that receptor site, and as long as it's on the receptor site, it's like pull, right? Whenever you want to quit pulling, you use another material called acetylcholine esterase, which is an enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So when you want to quit contracting, you flip the switch back off by removing the acetylcholine from the receptor site, and you stop contracting. So this is pretty cool. So if you think about how quickly this works, you can like move back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And really what's happening is you release the acetylcholine, it triggers the receptor sites, you start to initiate the action potential, you constrict the muscle fiber, and then what? You want to stop, so then you use an enzyme to break that molecule down, and then it releases from the receptor site, so you quit stimulant, right? And over again. So this is pretty crazy how quick it happens. So this is really cool stuff. Understanding this lets you understand some other things, like what happens when you get exposed to certain poisons. So let's use as an example a lot of nerve agents that are present in like world wars, or some of the more modern ones are like sarin or VX or something. Nerve agents, like from a chemical warfare standpoint, what they do is they mimic acetylcholine. So if you would inhale some sort of toxic, or I should say a neurological toxin like sarin or VX, or eat, there's Botox, like, botulism toxin. You know what Botox is, where they like give you the shots and it like tightens up the muscles in your face permanently? Well, that comes from a bacteria that produces a toxin that is a neurotoxin. And those neurotoxins, of which are all of those things I was just talking about, really operate in the same way. They mimic acetylcholine. So whenever you get your little Botox shot around those wrinkles in your eyes, of which like my face is all totally wrinkled now, then it causes those little muscles to contract and stay contracted because they mimic acetylcholine, so they can attach to the receptor site, but they never can be broken down by acetylcholine esterase. You can flip the switch on, you can never turn it off. And so you all get like Botoxed up and your face, can't move as much. It helps you get rid of wrinkles. In the case of some sort of like chemical warfare type thing, if you inhale that gas, then that paralyzes your diaphragm. So you take a big breath. Oh, that's great. But then all of a sudden it paralyzes it because it says contract, but never release. And so, because it's kind of typical thing is people get all cramped up and then they can't breathe and then they die. So it's really super horrible. There are some similar types of acetylcholine mimicking neurotransmitters in like different venoms and toxins in animals and plants and stuff. So it's pretty crazy. But what it does, the reason it works is it mimics this acetylcholine, which should be able to be and is able to be released by your body and then destroyed by your body. So that way you can contract and relax instead of just permo-contract, which is really bad. I think certain, maybe taipan or cobra venom does this. And what they have to do is put somebody on a ventilator for like a month while that venom naturally breaks down, because otherwise they can't breathe. It paralyzes their diaphragm. So, a bummer, don't get bit by that. Okay, in other news, while you're still using your muscles and you're not like totally paralyzed or whatever, you require energy to make your muscles work. And you know this, right? You exercise a lot, you need more energy. The form of energy that you really want is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You've talked about this all the time. And that is provided by cellular respiration. And you can only do cellular respiration if you have oxygen. So this really has a great influence on your muscles. Your muscles have a limited supply of oxygen and a limited supply of sugars. So if you're really stressing your muscles, you're wanting to generate a lot of ATP in the mitochondria in your cells. Your muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria to do this, but the problem is if you produce a whole bunch of ATP, that means you've required a lot of oxygen and a lot of sugars to break down for that fuel or organic compounds. You can only do this so fast. You can only replace oxygen so fast in your muscles. And so if you stress yourself too much, you'll run out of oxygen and then you can't make any more ATP, which is bad. So you try to do lactic acid fermentation temporarily, but to make a little bit of ATP, but that only lasts a little bit, and then your muscles fatigue. So if you are running out of oxygen in muscle, it starts to burn. So if you've ever sprinted or done crunches, like when I'm on like crunch number 563, I start to burn. Actually, it's more like crunch number 3, your abs start to burn. That's because you're depleting those muscles of oxygen. And then your body's like, I need ATP. I'm going to do some lactic acid fermentation to make that. It's not great, but I don't have any oxygen anymore. And then that creates that burning sensation that we've all probably been familiar with and we don't really enjoy. So that lactic acid builds up, and finally you reach a point where you just can't go anymore. If there's no more oxygen, your muscle just flat out cannot go. That happens to everybody, right? It's just a limit of our physiology. So what do you want to do when you do that, when you max out, you run out of oxygen and so forth? You have to go through a recovery period where the lactic acid gets removed, your oxygen has to get resupplied, excess heat has to get shunted away by like making your face bright red and breathing heavy and all this other stuff. And then energy gets resupplied by blood flow to that area. And then you're ready to go again. Some of you that do sports, maybe like, you run and you sprint and you're like worn out, and like a few minutes later, you're ready to do it over again because you've been through that recovery period for that muscle. One other thing about sports is muscle performance. This is interesting. Humans have 2 types of muscle fibers or muscle cells. We have what are called fast fibers or fast twitch fibers and slow twitch fibers. And those 2 different types of muscle tissue, fibers, cells, determine your amount of power and your amount of endurance that you have. This is really going to make a lot of sense for anyone that has done any sort of sport or just observing sports. This is really, I always find this hugely interesting. Right? So humans are interesting in that we have these 2 different types of fibers in our body, and we can kind of exercise and promote one type of fiber over the other type of fiber. Fast fibers or fast twitch are large. They're larger in diameter. They're powerful. They can contract really rapidly. They use large amounts of energy and especially sugars, and they tire quickly. They can use up their oxygen really fast. These are like your big giant V8 engines of your body. Okay, they can do a lot of work, but they use a lot of fuel, right? Those are the types of ones that make you strong. Like these are the ones that someone who does weightlifting and can lift a big, huge amount of weight for a really short period of time. This is what they would use to do that. They would exercise in such a way to encourage these fast fibers to become more prominent. If you're sprinting, some people are really super fast. It's because they have lots of fast fibers. They can provide a whole bunch of energy, but only for a short period of time. Those people who can sprint really fast, but only for a short period of time. They can't maintain that particular speed for a long time. On the other hand, slow twitch fibers or slow fibers, they're smaller in diameter. They contract at a slower rate, but they can go for a long period of time. They don't run themselves out of oxygen as quickly, and they can continue over a long period of time to continue to contract and relax, contract and relax. So those promote endurance. So for someone who is an endurance athlete, like a long distance runner or swimming, they're going to have more slow fibers, or they're going to promote slow fiber formation, and that they can go for, think of marathon runners. They run for like 26 miles. That's crazy. How do they do that? It's because they use these slow fibers, right? Over time, slow contraction. That same marathon runner, if they tried to sprint and use their fast fibers, they would get exhausted right away because they would deplete real quickly all of their oxygen supply to those fast fibers. So depending on what type of athletics you're doing, you're going to promote fast fibers or slow fibers. Fast fibers are when you're like doing really heavy, intense things for short periods of time. Slow fibers are lots and lots and lots of reps, but not overly stressed at any point in time. Now, here's what's really cool. So we just had Thanksgiving recently, and you may have eaten some turkey, or you've had some chicken recently, and maybe depending upon what type of person you are, you might prefer white meat or dark meat in your chicken or turkey. Now, here's where it ties into this. That meat's really just muscle fibers, right? Whenever you're talking about a chicken, the muscles in the chicken's breast, which control its wings flapping, right? Chickens are these big fat birds or turkeys, and it's hard for them to fly. So they need these really giant muscles to be able to make them fly. That is their breast muscle. Those muscle fibers in a chicken breast, which are white, are fast fibers. Large, powerful, large amounts of energy, and tire easily. If you've seen a chicken or turkey fly, they fly for a little bit, maybe, and then they just take off and run away. Right? They don't fly around like we would imagine like a migrating duck or something like that. On the other hand, the dark meat in a poultry are slow fibers. What do chickens and turkeys do all day? They run around on their legs. All day long, they're moving around on their legs. Walk, 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 walk. Those are slow fibers. They're darker in color because they have more mitochondria and they have a better blood supply. So that explains why dark meat is darker than white meat. If you've ever eaten like duck or dove, the breast of a duck or like a dove, because they're a migratory bird, they fly and they fly and they fly and they fly. So unlike a chicken or a turkey, dove is very, very dark in color because it's all slow fiber, greater oxygen supply, more mitochondria, right? So that actually really super relates to this. Humans have a mix of fast and slow muscle fibers. So we actually can have a lot of endurance. We can also have a lot of strength. We get to have both, which is pretty cool. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, have a much greater amount of fast fibers, which means chimpanzees are really, really strong for their size. Their muscles compared to ours, same size, they're stronger. They can beat you up. We can run away from them though, because we've got those endurance slow fibers, which is really great. Okay, we're going to stop here and then we'll take a look at some of the other aspects of this in class. Thanks.